Alright, are you ready to get started?
Ready?
You got your voice memos on?
Turn your voice memos on.
This is what I look like in 1966.
Ooh,
the day
I
got my
want to
commission.
see that.
See that?
I want to see.
Oh, this is like y'all's ID, y'all identification?
That was my military ID in the reserve, yeah.
Wow.
That was the day I got my commission.
That's crazy.
So cool.
Is that a stormtrooper or what?
Wow, it's so cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's cool.
Thank you.
Alright, guys. Let's get started. Come on.
All right.
Yeah, I was a sergeant in Korea. I got the commission after when I got out of college and started my career. I then re-enlisted in the Air Force. I went up as far as tech sergeant and then captain. And it's kind of comical. I tell people it took me 13 years to make tech sergeant, but only 6 months to make captain.
It's crazy. I know.
It would have been first lieutenant, but they fouled things up, got my records all screwed up to where I crossed my 34th birthday. So then you can't be a lieutenant after you're 34.
All right. Yeah. You ready?
Yes.
All right. Cool.
So we're going to start with just some basic questions that we need for it to be able to go in the database.
Please speak louder.
Okay, we're going to start with some basic questions that we need for it to go to the National Library of
Yeah. It's the
something.
archives.
So just questions that they need for it to be archived.
So, would you please state your full name for the record?
Robert Henry Taylor,
Taylor. And what year were you born in? And
1932, March 24th,
and where were you born?
Brooklyn, New York.
Please state your ethnicity or race.
My mama, she was a Siciliano.
Oh.
She was born in Sicily, but my father was an Anglo, so I don't really speak the language, only the curse words.
And would you please describe the location and years of your service?
I went in the Air Force the first time in May of 1951 and served until 1955, then went back in 1964 in the reserves and stayed until I retired in 1971 or 72, something like that.
What is the highest ranking
Captain,
captain? What branch did you serve in?
Air Force.
And what battles did you serve in? What battles did you serve in?
No named battles. I was, like I said, up here on Chodo Island. Our purpose was air control and warning. We controlled all of the aircraft sorties, the UN aircraft, north of the front line on the west side and up McGalley all the way to the Yellow River. And since late World War II and probably still today, all of the battle aircraft are controlled from the ground by radar and radio. The controllers are themselves pilots, and they use the term vector. They direct the aircraft to the targets, tell them when to engage or when to unload, and then direct them back home. And that was our legal purpose. Our not so legal purpose, and if I tell you too much about it, I'll have to kill you, was my job was communications. I was a teletype and operator and cryptographer. And so I was the supervisor of the teletype and cryptography section in communications. And my job was to gather intelligence and ship it back to 5th Air Force headquarters, who would gather the intelligence from the other 5 squadrons in our group, and they would crunch it into a war plan called a frag order for the next 24 hours, send it back to us encrypted, excuse me. We would unencrypt it and take it to radar operations for them. They'd distribute it among the pilot controllers, and who would then use it to conduct the war for the next 24 hours. And actually, the controllers are really the ones that conducted the war. The pilots and their aircraft were the weapons. Never thought of a person as a weapon, but they were. Whenever a pilot made a confirmed kill, the controller got credit for it as well. And by Air Force tradition, when a pilot makes 5 confirmed kills, he's declared an ace, and he goes home.
Wait, so does he have to go home, or like, does he?
Yeah, they ship him home. Believe me, they want to go home. Those guys are. It doesn't take long before it's really working on them. The MiG aircraft, for one thing, could outrun and outmaneuver our F-86s. Not because they had better pilots. They didn't. As a matter of fact, they were just kids, 19 and 20-year-olds, that get 3 or 4 months of pilot training and basically suicide missions. The reason was that our F-86s carried far too much redundancy. And say, well, okay, that's good for the pilots' lives. Yeah, no, it isn't. Because, for example, one of the redundancies was self-sealing fuel tanks. Problem was that they were only self-sealing up to 50 caliber, and the enemy aircraft carried 30 millimeter cannons. So they were useless, but the Air Force wouldn't remove them. And so that made it a tough war. I can remember one time, and I'm not going to use the same words that this guy did, but I was monitoring VHF channels, and because that's the air-to-ground radio, and there was a particularly nasty fighter sweep up around the Yalu River, because there was, right across the Yalu River was Antong Air Base, which was in Manchuria, so legally we weren't supposed to be up there. But that's where all the MiGs came from. Well, this one was a particularly nasty fight, and finally you'd hear, "This is John Black, leader. Come on, guys, we're going home." And about that time, this wee little voice came up and says, "I'm all screwed up." And back came a crisp voice, "This is John Black, leader. Who said that?" The response came back, "I ain't that screwed up."
Wait, so you said that you worked in teletype and cryptography.
Yes.
So the messages that y'all were like encrypting and like uncrypting, like what kind of messages were they?
Well, some of them were administrative and supply. I mean, the radar was constantly blowing its magnetron tubes, and so naturally they had to ask for any outfit that could furnish a tube, you know. But as I said, my unofficial job was intel gathering, and I would send that down, and the Air Force headquarters would include it in the war plan for the next day, and then send it back encrypted. When it came back, this frag order, or war plan, was about 3 yards of teletype paper, and we would then have to carry it down. The communication center was here on this mountain, and then the road went down and out to a point, and that's where the radar ops was. And it was the middle of the night. The winter was minus 30 degrees the entire winter, and there was a big power unit halfway between where we were and radar ops, big diesel engine running a power generator, and there was always a Korean Marine Corps guard there who couldn't speak a word of English, but he would challenge us with yeah, and more often than not you couldn't hear it because of the, but when that M1 volt clicked, you damn well heard that, GI, GI, and so that was some of the scary part from our own people. I mean, these were allies, I should say.
And I just want to say, if we ask you a question that touches on a sensitive topic for you, like, you're not obligated to answer. You can just tell us, like, you know. Well,
there wouldn't be anything sensitive, but there might be something that if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Okay.
Refrain from those questions. All right. So while you were enlisted, did you achieve like any special honors with type of work that you?
Yeah, I didn't get any hero medals per se, but our organization received twice a Presidential Unit Citation, which is equivalent to the Distinguished Service Medal for an individual.
Wait, can you repeat the what the organization get?
It was the Presidential Unit Citation, and our outfit received it twice. And then, of course, I served through 4 major campaigns, and so my Korean. This is the Korean service ribbon, and that when I wear it on my breast, it has 3 battle stars, 3 bronze stars.
And that's for captain?
No, no. Captain came in '66 when I was in the reserve.
Right. Okay.
This was presented in 1960, 70, I don't know, the 50th anniversary of the Korean War, and it was awarded to all who served in country between 50 and 53.
Right.
And that's the national defense. Everybody in the military gets that, and that's the UN. Anybody that serves in UN operations gets that, and anybody in support of the Korean service got that one. I've got a total of 3 rows on a uniform. We also received the Syngman Rhee. He was the president of Korea during the war. The Syngman Rhee Presidential Unit Citation, and this one, and then more recently, the Korean Embassy awarded every man that served in Korea what they call an Ambassador of Peace medal.
Okay.
And then, of course, I got a longevity ribbon and a Pi Kappa Phi, Eagle Scout or whatever.
So, you said you were stationed at Chodo Island.
Yep.
So, what exactly went on in Chodo?
Our main purpose, our published, if you will, purpose, was to control all of the aircraft north of the 38th parallel. Every United Nations aircraft, combat aircraft. The B-29 bombers came from Okinawa from 20th Air Force, and the F-86s came mostly from Kimpo, which is north of Seoul, Kimpo Air Base.
So there's Seoul.
Here's Seoul, and Kimpo is up just almost to the front lines. We were like, I think, 8 or 10 miles. When I first went over there, I was in the 606th, and that was on a mountain called Old Smoky, just outside of Kimpo Air Base. And then when they needed a communication supervisor on Chodo, I was promoted and transferred to the 608, Detachment 2. I was a buck sergeant then. They call us buck sergeant because it's the first grade of sergeant. They eventually changed that to airman first class.
More classier.
Okay, so you didn't put anything down about like what got you into joining the service, and like was there
To avoid the draft.
to avoid the draft?
Yeah, I joined the Air Force for 4 years to stay out of the Army for 2, because I told them I was a lover, not a fighter. Ended up in the only Air Force outfit that drew combat pay. So all the good it did me. My next door neighbor waited till he got drafted, went in a year after me, got out a year ahead of me, and never went past Honolulu. So, it's good. I'll tell you the truth. We all on the Rock, as we called it, used to say that wouldn't do it again for $1 million, but wouldn't take $1 million for the experience.
So even though you weren't in a direct combat position, you still wouldn't go back?
We got bombed and shelled and machine gunned, and so you could say.
So everything that would have happened if you weren't there.
Yeah, see, we would never have withstood a ground attack. We were just too unarmed. Hell, I didn't even get a weapon issued to me. I had to buy a rifle from a Korean for 5 cartons of cigarettes. Cigarettes were legal tender over there. And so I bought this Japanese rifle that was rebored for 30-06, which was M1 ammo. And it's kind of comical because the Japanese being such small people, the stock was much shorter than an American weapon, so it had a good deal of kick.
Right.
But it was accurate. We received, have you ever watched MASH?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever watch the episode where they had what they called 5 o'clock Charlie, this old airplane that was sputtering around? And Well, one thing about MASH, it was very accurate in the way it was in Korea. We used to call him Bed Check Charlie because he came in the dark of the moon. Russian PO-2 aircraft, which was a World War I biplane with 2 open cockpits. They would come in the dark of the moon. That's why the name Bed Check Charlie. We couldn't see them. And they'd come across from the mainland, circle around the island, approach the beach, cut the engine, and coast. Well, those darn things were like a box kite. They could probably coast for 100 miles. And then the guy in the back seat would throw out mortar shells and hand grenades and strafe with a burp gun. Fortunately, being as dark as it was, they couldn't see us any better than we could see them. So it wasn't as lethal as it could have been, but it was lethal enough. And that's how we got combat pay. That and being shelled from the mainland. There were caves on the cliffs, and they had big cannons in there, big field pieces that they used to shell us with. And that was where my other duty came in, the one that, if I get into too much detail, I'd have to kill you about. I was on a team. There was a donkey soldier, which is a Korean mercenary. I was our guide. Then there was a KMC, Korean Marine. That's this right here. I swapped my U.S. collar brass for his, who was our interpreter, and a U.S. Marine that was our brawn, and me, I was the intel, the gatherer. So intel gathering was my secondary duty. So we would go over, infiltrate, and gather intel and come back, send it to 5th Headquarters. And those cannons in the caves, the Air Force had been trying to annihilate them. They couldn't see them because the jets couldn't get down low enough to fly them, and the prop aircraft would take too long to get up there and wouldn't have the range to get all the way up there and back. So one time we just happened to spot on the back side of the mountain the way in, and so we reported that to 5th Air Force. The next day they sent a Canadian fighter jet, and he had rockets, and all of a sudden the top of the mountain blew off. We were standing on our side watching it, and that was kind of a nice thing to see. It turns out it was a big ammo dump in there as well as the cannons.
So, what prompted you to join the Air Force?
To stay out of the Army for 2 years.
So that was was that the branch that you intended, or was that just?
Well, when Korea got heavy, all of the enlistments were closed for all the branches, the Navy, the Air Force, only the Army, and only draftees. You couldn't even enlist in the Army, you had to be drafted. And so one day, I was a mail courier at Pan American Airways in Miami. And I went to work one morning, and one of the guys that I worked with had a newspaper, and he said, "Look, the Air Force has opened 50 enlistments." I went out there that night and camped in front of the recruiting office overnight to make sure I got one of the 50. I mean, I didn't even have a high school diploma at the time. I was a big shot. I didn't need a high school education. I dropped out in the 11th grade. Big, smart thing. But I got my diploma in Korea, and I used to really enjoy when after I got out and applied for work, and they're always on the application blank was, "Where did you graduate?" I'd say Kimpo, Korea. That usually drew a lot of looks.
So how was going to school, getting your diploma? How did you balance that out with?
I just took a GED exam.
Really?
Yeah.
Was there any studying involved?
There is today, but there wasn't then. Okay. I would have done it before I went in, except that in those days you had to be a veteran to qualify to take it. But no, I just took the exam. I got 97th percentile.
Wow. Good.
Which proves I didn't really need to stay in high school.
Right.
That would not be true today, believe me.
Yeah.
It would not.
It's changed quite a bit. So, going from working in a normal job over here on like the homeland and all that, and immediately going into a war style, like how was adapting to the military?
Well, it was a transition, but you got to understand. First, there was 12 weeks of basic training,
Right.
which you learn to obey orders and snap to, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was 6 months or so that I went to tech school to learn what I did, and then taught in tech school for a few months before getting sent overseas. So the transition was kind of gradual. And in fact, the tech school was a blessing in disguise, because it was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, where it gets pretty darn cold in the wintertime. And so it wasn't quite as a shock in Korea. It was a shock enough, but it wasn't as bad. Minus 30 the entire year, the entire winter, and the Yellow Sea frozen solid for about 16 feet thick. I never thought I'd ever see it so cold that salt water froze. The Yellow Sea was a solid block of ice. We had a 30-foot iceberg on our beach. And for drinking water, we depended on distilling seawater. But our distillation units froze and broke down, so we resorted to scooping up snow and putting chlorine tablets in it.
Wow. So it seems to be that you had to adapt more on the Korean War front than you did back home.
Yeah.
Basic training.
Yeah, that was a life education. It really was.
Right. So during all that time over there in Korea, with everything breaking down and all that, you guys had to improvise a lot. So
You better bet me.
So like, just how did you like keep up with everything? It's just,
You want to stay alive.
you want to stay alive. That's your main goal. Is just
Yeah, absolutely. You want to stay alive long enough to go home.
right.
That's your main motivator.
Yeah, I mean, humans are very adaptable. And you throw adversity at you, and you're going to meet it. Well, you learn to grow up in a big hurry. That's one thing. Actually, I joined the Navy Reserve when I was 15. I lied about my age. And after about 3 years, they caught up with me and kicked me out, so I couldn't join the Navy. And that left only the Air Force. I wasn't about to join the Marines.
Right, especially when it's the only one.
I admire the Marines, believe me, and they had a lot rougher basic training than we did. In fact, my wife had a tougher basic training than I. She was in the Army. She was not during Korea, towards the end of the Vietnam period. She served in Germany as a helicopter crew chief.
Wow.
So how did you and your wife meet?
Oh, that's almost a romance story. I used to go to this piano bar. It was a sing-along piano bar in Miami. And she was there one night, and I asked her to dance. Now, dancing is one of my achievements. My father was a musician, and during World War II, he played at USOs, and my mother loved to dance, but she couldn't because he wasn't there, so she taught me. So when I met my wife and we danced, she gave me her phone number, we chatted for the evening, and I called her a few times. We couldn't seem to connect because she was starting a new job. Then along came Hurricane Andrew and blew everything I owned out into the Everglades. I figured, okay, I'll never see her again. Too bad. Well, one night, almost a year of the day later, I went to the place that same piano player was then playing, and there she was, sitting at the bar. She didn't remember me. And the piano player was starting to go around introducing everybody. I said, Mac, I know Janice. She owes me a dance. In fact, she owes me a date to go dancing. So he played a song that we could dance to, and we got up, and after about 3 steps, she says, oh, I remember you. And we've been together ever since. This year we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, and she's 6 inches taller than me and 25 years younger. She keeps me youthful. And I'll tell you, getting old is not for the faint of heart. Yeah, I got fake eyes, fake ears, fake teeth, fake artery, and a fake shoulder. And God knows what's to come. So if you can avoid getting old, do it. It sucks. People say, well, consider the alternative. Well, what do you consider? Nobody's ever come back to say whether it's better or worse.
True. So, like, with talking about all these relationships and everything, like,
Talking about what?
All your relationships and your story with your wife. Was during the war, was there someone special back home that you were like?
Sort of, yeah. As a matter of fact, it was, because she was a student of mine when I was teaching at tech school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she was stationed at Maxwell Air Force Base, and when I came back, my current wife is my fifth. I said I was going to keep doing it till I got it right.
Looks like you got it right.
I got it right this time, you better believe it. We are blissfully happy.
So do you have any memorable companionships from the war? Someone that, like, kept you going? Any friendship?
There were no possibility of companionships on Chodo. The Korean women were all old mama-sans that did our laundry. If there were any young ones, they stayed in the village. And you wouldn't want to have anything to do with the Korean women anyway. They were dangerous. Disease was rampant. Not just sexually transmitted diseases, but they had a strain of TB that was a superbug, and didn't want to get near them.
So here you were stationed on Chodo here, but
Right.
you moved up into
Right
the
here.
mainland, right?
I'm sorry?
Were you just stationed on Chodo, or did you move into the mainland?
No, the Air Force doesn't move. We set up an installation to maintain it. It's not like the Army where you're a combatant first and a specialist second, and you're moving like the infantry. The Air Force are specialists first and combatants second. Combatants only for defense. And so you set up an installation for some purpose, and you man that installation, and you stay there. And you stay there no matter what.
Any question?
Excellent.
If there is one life lesson that you learned from being in the war that you can apply to your everyday life, what would that be?
Oh, that's a hard one because there were so many.
Tell them all. We got time.
Yeah, we got time. Listen, every single one.
Life lesson. Look out for your buddy. Keep your back to the wall. We used to have a saying, keep your back to the wall, your nose to the grindstone, and your elbow to the wheel. Now try to work in that position.
Right.
So, while you were stationed, how did you keep in touch with your family? Was there a way to do that?
Well, we had mail after a fashion. As troops in a combat zone, mail was free, and we got it about once a month. During the winter, they had to airdrop it, and that depended heavily on the weather, which was always bad. And so sometimes it was more than a month before we got. Same with getting paid. We're supposed to get paid once a month, but sometimes we went 3 months without getting paid. Well, so what? No place you could spend it. We were furnished everything we needed. Everybody smoked in those days, so we were furnished cigarettes. The people stationed down on the mainland, and I was one of them for the first month or two that I was over there. We got a ration card, and so we could buy cigarettes. They were a whopping 80 cents a carton in those days. And I guess it was probably late winter of '53, and we were ordered to take flu shots, which I didn't want to do. Wound up with the worst case of flu I ever had in my life. 104 fever, convulsing, strapped down to the bed. We had a half a Quonset hut that had 2 beds in it. That was our hospital. And naturally, that was the night bed check decided to turn around. And I don't know how appropriate this is going to be, but I'm going to tell you the story. I had to pee. Bad. So they unstrapped me and they gave me a specimen bottle. So I started peeing in the specimen bottle, and all of a sudden we heard something hit the side of the Quonset hut, and all of a sudden I'm feeling something splashing on the floor, my feet. I looked down, and there was a hole in the bottom of the specimen bottle, right through it, piece of shrapnel in the wall over there, and a hole over here. That was scary. I guess that you could say it was a life lesson. The next day they evacuated me to the evac hospital in Yongdongpo, which is just outside of Seoul. Today it's a suburb. And I felt really guilty about that, because here I am in a ward full of guys with bullet holes in their guts and legs and arms shot off, and me with the flu. Well, I got over it in a few days, fortunately. They kept cramming me full of antibiotics, and it went away.
So, was there ever a point in time where you felt that you wanted to go home, or that, you shouldn't be at the war anymore?
Yeah, the day I went in. That was true for everybody.
Yeah.
It really was. You knew you had a job to do, and you knew you were damn well going to do it. But that didn't stop you from wanting to go home.
Sure.
I mean, there is no place like home. Wherever home might be.
Right.
So I think those are all the questions we have for you, but feel free to tell us any more stories you have, or if we didn't touch on something you want to talk about.
That's one rather comical story. Comic relief was always welcome.
Right.
We used to get airdrops sometimes from the Greek Air Force. And I don't know if you know what a C-47 is. It's a twin-engine, small aircraft that the first ones came off the assembly line in 1932, and they went back to production in 1950, and they're still flying today. They were dubbed Goonie birds. If you've ever seen any Vietnam movies, the gunships were C-47. Well, that's how we got our airdrops. And one time, the Greek Air Force brought our airdrop up, and they didn't care about parachutes. Most of the stuff they just kicked out, because they figured, hey, it wasn't fragile. Yeah, like no. You know what a Quonset hut is?
Yes.
Okay. The mess hall supply was a half a Quonset hut. The mess hall was a 1.5 long. They kicked out a sack of flour, went through the roof of the mess hall supply hut, landed in the sugar bin, and broke open. So for a couple of months we had very sweet bread and very thick coffee. And another time in the American Air Force, some high-ranking officer at 5th Air Force headquarters thought we deserved some fresh eggs. Hadn't had any in almost a year. Okay, guess which parachute didn't open? We scraped them off the hillside. The food was terrible, but you're hungry, you eat most anything, and it was most anything. It was what they call C rations, company rations, and it was pulled pork, 60% grease, pulled beef, 70% grease, pulled ham, 80% grease. They used to, the Korean workers at the mess hall would take the great big institutional size cans, take a meat cleaver, chop one side out, then turn it over, chop a hole, put a tire pump up to it, and pump the stuff out, and it would hit that pan and go wah. And that's what we had twice a day. Mornings were great. We had fresh made hot cakes, and throughout the time we always had fresh baked bread, and those cooks would really make good bread. So it wasn't all bad. But it was kind of comical at one point where this officer was appointed his additional duty as mess officer. So he started posting these menus, all these fancy menus, like ham croquettes. It was a stringing ham made in a ball. Creamery butter, it was margarine. So one time he was away, and the commander, who was a character, typed up the menu. Sloppy, greasy ham, rancid old barn grease. So that kind of lightened things a little bit.
Yes.
And every once in a while there'd be some guy that would type up something, put it on the bulletin board that was rather comical. So we had our share of relief, comic relief, which helped make things go by. Sometimes not such nice things, like our anti-aircraft was Army, and they had their bunker down by the beach. Excuse me. And one time, coming back from a red alert, you know what a red alert is?
No.
Okay. When I thought you'd been watching Star Trek and red alert. Whenever we were going to be attacked, it went on red alert. Go yellow first if there's a bogey. A bogey is an unidentified aircraft. A bandit is an identified aircraft. So we went on red alert. And while we were there, one of the Korean Marines, or maybe it was Rock Army, snuck into the anti-aircraft bunker and was stealing clothes. Well, we went white and they caught him. They shot him. Next thing you know, here's the Korean major there. We thought, oh boy, they're in trouble. No, he apologized to them. And this was during the winter when the Yellow Sea was frozen solid. He stripped the entire company down to bare butt, marched him out on the ice, and kept him there for a half an hour and brought him back. That's the kind of discipline the Koreans, these were the good guys. Another situation, I promised that I wouldn't tell the bulk of the kids, but this might be difficult for you. And if it starts to be, just let me know. The donkey soldiers were Korean mercenaries who were trained by our Marines, and they would go over to the mainland and hold harassment missions, and whatever they could steal, that was their pay. Well, one time they went over and they stole this Chinese colonel's desk, brought it back, and hey, big deal, you know, big party. The village, they got them all charged up, so they went back over and stole the colonel. Well, okay, you know, that might not be such a bad deal because you can interrogate him. No, they hung him from the city gates and let him stay there until the buzzards picked him bones clean. And these were the good guys. You can imagine what the bad guys did.
Crazy.
They had a bad habit. A lot of us would dig bunkers instead of living in tents. I didn't, but because I was a tent chief and I was required to stay there. But there were a lot that would dig a bunker, build up with sandbags and everything, and it was a bit safer. Except the stovepipe would come out and it had a spark arrestor on it to keep it from being visible at night. Well, the Korean infiltrators, the North Korean infiltrators, or Chinese as they might have been, would sneak over late at night and they would lift the spark arrestor off, drop a hand grenade down the pipe, of course, blow the stove open and kill everybody in the bunker. And so we decided to take care of them. We built a make-believe bunker with a stovepipe that was only about that far into the ground. So a guy drops his hand grenade in and he was no more. Well, they quit doing that. Just can't imagine why.
Because they could probably.
And as for what it's worth, you're all aware of the atom bomb in Hiroshima, leveled the area, right? Well, that was in 1944. In 1952, which was what, 5 years, when I went over, got off the ship in Yokohama, Japan, on the train to Hiroshima, and then by bus. Hiroshima is a horseshoe-shaped lake, bay, I mean, and the atom bomb was dropped in the middle of that. There's a statue there. And down on the lower side was a former kamikaze base that was now our replacement depot called Iwakuni. And so we went by bus from the train depot around. You look around, was there ever a war here? Let alone an atom bomb. That's how fast those people built things up. When I went on R&R in Japan in April, I looked up a buddy of mine that was, we were served together in the States. And so he started showing me around. He said, you see that building over there? About a 5 or 6 story building. It took them 30 days to build it from excavation to full occupancy. They would build the scaffolds as they climbed them, and it'd be like ants. That's the way they work. It's amazing. The Americans could take lessons from that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Well, I can't think of much of anything else.
Well, that was a wonderful interview.
Yes,
Well, thank you.
We enjoyed you being here.
Well, frankly, I'm very honored to have been invited, and I'm very impressed at what you kids are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for driving up from Georgia.
Yeah.
Just
That part was fun. This has been too, actually. I haven't blabbed so much since I went to a veterans meeting. Yeah, it was good. Now, I'm going to leave this with you all.
Okay, thank you.
You guys can look at it. I showed it to the other class. Most of the pictures, there's no combat pictures there exactly. Most of the pictures were taken after April of '53, because first of all, in the wintertime at 30 below zero, no camera's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have one anyway. It wasn't until I went on R&R that I got a camera. That was my first stop when I got off the plane. You get off the train in Tokyo and went to a camera shop and bought a camera. It was a Minolta. Nobody had ever heard of.
Mm-hmm.
right.
You know where they are today. They're big sellers. Yeah. 35 millimeter. Everybody had to have a 35 millimeter. Of course, they were all film cameras then.
Right.
I still have a 35 millimeter film camera. Know anybody that wants to be a collector? You can hardly buy the film for them anymore.
Right.
Right.
It's digital.
I've got a digital one now that I use.
So how long are you and your wife in town for?
I'm sorry?
How long are you and your wife in town
We're going to have to go home today.
today? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about a 6-7 hour drive. It's not bad.
Not too bad.
We're road warriors. Come April, my wife does volunteer work for the Department of Labor in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
They hold these meetings around the state called summits, where all of the state Department of Labor officials give the seminars. Well, in April we go first to one in Savannah, and that's a 6-hour drive, and then we'll be staying there a few days. Then we go to D.C. to visit my grandson, who is a lieutenant in the Army, psychological ops, and a reunion of my Korea outfit, and then back to Georgia to another summit, and then back home.
Oh, y'all are on the road a lot.
So that's about 1,400 miles total. We put over 25,000 miles a year on our cars. To put that in perspective, that's once around the world with the equator.
Okay. It's a lot of driving.
Yeah, we love it. We're road. I hate flying. I used to love it. I worked for Pan Am before I went in the Air Force. But with all the security and everything today, this takes all the fun out. Last week, I had to go up to New York to a cousin's funeral, and it just was not a fun flight.
Yeah,
Of course, going for a funeral wasn't fun anyway, but I don't like flying anywhere, but I love road trips. The scenery is great. We have a motorhome that we travel with a good bit. This summer, we're going to be taking a trip down the Natchez Trace Parkway. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Natchez Trace is a former Indian trail that runs from Nashville to Natchez, Mississippi. Today it's a paved 2-lane road, kind of like the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we've done that on our motorhome, and now we're going to be doing this. It goes there's all kinds of points of interest, historical sites, museums, and that sort of thing. We're kind of history nuts.
Okay.
And next year we're going out to Yellowstone and Little Bighorn. And a couple of years ago we took a vacation to Canada, and coming back through Montana, I tracked down my best buddy from Cheyenne in the service together, and so I'm going to visit him. I haven't seen him since 1952.
Wow.
So that's going to be fun.
That's good. Well, y'all got a lot planned. I hope
Yeah.
y'all enjoy yourselves.
Well, I'm going to live till I die.
Yes, sir.
And that's what you got to do.
So, all right. Well, once again, thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I enjoyed it.